how they look after I have taken them home. I've scraped the cappings off. The bees always cap their honey when it's dry, to keep it dry. Honey is the driest, one of the driest substances there is, even though it looks like a liquid. It's called dry because the water content, the moisture content is very low. It's like 4% humidity in the honey. So it's hygroscopic, the word, meaning if the lid is off, I keep checking, the lid is off. If the lid was off, it would be sucking moisture in from the air. And so if your honey at home has the lid off, it's not as good as it was yesterday. It gets worse and worse as it takes on moisture. Honey is supposed to be dry. The bees know that, and when they take nectar, they put nectar in these little cells. They made these cells, by the way. I gave them a pattern to use, but then they filled out the pattern with their little wax. They consume honey, they heat it somehow, and little flakes of wax come out the sides of their bodies. They grab the wax and mold it into hexagons. It's really quite amazing. Everything about bees is kind of amazing, but when the nectar is put in here, they heat it either with the outdoor temperature or with their body heat, and they cause air to pass over as they're heating it. If you have some method maybe of hair or a piece of lint or a bit of smoke, you can tell on the front of the hive, they're pulling air in one side and blowing air out the other. They're all lined up in there. The whole group of them is sending air up and through the hive. They're drying the nectar and turning it into honey. When it's dry enough, they then seal it with a cap. And so it stays dry for forever, then, so to speak. And so when I take the honey from them, I have to break open the cappings with a kind of a fork tool, and then I put it in an extractor, which is a centrifuge, and spin it, and the honey flies out and goes down, and I collect it. I pass it through a couple of screens only. So this has passed through a screen, but nothing else. And then the honeycomb is still moist with honey. I can't extract anymore. I got all I could, but it's still moist with honey, and I know the bees would appreciate it, so I give it back to them. And they've had this then a week or less, and so now I took it again for the second time because now they've cleaned it out and it's nice and dry. And a person could give this to them again and let them fill it up again, or they can cut it out and melt it for beeswax, and that's what I'll be doing. I of the opinion that we shouldn't take away work from an organism to make them stronger. We should let them work. And so one of the bad things that people advise you is to never ever have the bees make their own honeycomb, because it takes honey to make honeycomb. You're wasting your honey. Why don't you just give them honeycomb that's already made? So where did that thought come from? It's like telling you, please just stay in bed, I'll do it for you. That way, you'll be stronger, right? You're not wasting your energy on, no, you have to get up to be strong. And so if you don't let your bees make honeycomb, how are they going to, that's one of the things they do with their lives, is make honeycomb. So we don't take that away from them, we cause them to have to do it, but it costs us honey. And if you're making money on the bees, of course, you don't want to cost yourself anything. That's the trouble. I think a lot of these ideas come from the commercial side of things, where your life depends on making money on the bees. So a lot of these ideas we get come from that side of things. I'll pass on one of these. I think it's this one. On this side, you can see what I gave them. This is a sheet of foundation. It's called foundation, meaning the base. This is the base of what they build in. And then next to it, you can start to see how they started to expand upon the idea. This idea of foundation, I'll pass it here and send it around. The idea was a little nefarious, but a little bit, you want them to build in the right place. If you gave them 10 frames like that without any foundation in it, the bees might build combs across the frames. They don't have any reason to build along the frame. So if you put foundation in, at least they have the idea of what you want, and they'll follow that idea. But the nefarious idea is, let's make every single cell the same size, and let's make every cell the size of a worker larva. That's the bad idea. because someone along the way said, we only want them to make workers. We want them to work. We don't want them to make drones, which are males. That would be a waste of their energy. We want them to only make workers, females. They messed things up, those people, people like me, 100 years ago or less, because what they did was drive mites, which had a nice relationship with the bees. Mites were a spider-type creature, and they would find the drones growing in the cell. The drones look different and they're larger, the male bee. The little mite would find that cell, get in there, and stick themselves to the side of the drone and inhibit the life of the drone. But they got along, the bees and the mites got along, until we started forcing them to make only worker cells by giving them full sheets of foundation. Suddenly the mites lost their food, and the mite didn't give up. The mite said, what? I wonder how these workers taste. And so the mite then totally gave up only eating males and started to eat all the bees. And so mites, what a party. The mites are very happy now that we did this. So we have these unintended consequences from forcing bees to do things to make us more money. We end up losing money. And the mite population has exploded over the country. Hobbyists like me, like you, can get back to how it was by not giving full sheets of foundation in the starter part of the hive. This is the hive body, so to speak. The first part is larger. This is about the minimum depth for a brood nest. That's where the bees are making larvae for future generations. This depth is about the minimum for the bee to be happy. When we get a bee colony from a tree or from a bee supplier, we dump them into this part here and put the lid on and perhaps feed them. If we purchased them, they came hungry, and so maybe we have an empty super, and so we feed them in this space so they can come up that little hole and eat the honey without anybody from the outside being able to fight them for the honey. One of the bad ideas I wanted to mention today was the entrance feeder. You'll see in the bee catalogs a jar attached to the front of the hive, and that jar is full of honey or whatever you're feeding them. That's the worst possible thing to do to a new colony. You're feeding them because they're weak and they're new. They don't have a lot of defense against prey, predators. We purchase an entrance feeder. All the smell of that wonderful liquid is at the front door, and the bees have to quickly get it out of there and hide it, at the same time defending their front door. It's the worst possible idea. Other bees will come around, wasps, ants, everybody, smelling that, going right to the front door and say, what do you got here? That's an invitation to catastrophe. So don't use the entrance feeder. Instead, have an empty super and feed them above the colony, up here on this nice surface, underneath the lid. It's a great idea. Back to the idea of foundation sheets. If we give them foundation to tell them where to build, that's great. But if we limit it to a certain small area, like this, then under here, when their comb extends, thank you, this anywhere. Under here, where their comb extends, they can then be free to have any size cell they wish. So you'll see a comb from an origin of this nature. You'll see a comb that suddenly has quite free-form cells. Really kind of neat to see how they have a whole string of large cell, then small cell. They're quite creative in how they put in the cells when they're allowed to be. So this is the approved method of backyard beekeeping. Give them just a little foundation to make them build their comb where you want them to build it, but then let them be free about how they make it underneath.